What up, fight fans, and welcome to the very first episode of False Crack Deep Cuts, late night edition, with your host, Jay Snow. Oh, man. So this podcast is pretty much just an editorial, right? So a lot of times in MMA journalism, I'm learning as you're getting started, you cannot kind of give your opinion. Your whole thing is to report the news, and I'm stuck here in Vegas with a lot of time on my hands, so I thought I might give my opinion on some of the things that I've dug up today. So kind of, this episode's pretty much about that. Every time before I start every single episode, I always want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, notify, comment, all that stuff. Without your support, there really would be no show at all. So even though sometimes we just get one subscriber for the day, it really just sends me over the moon. I really get excited because we're just growing our fan base that much more. So please do yourself a favor and make sure you subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. Here we are, Wednesday night, Las Vegas. Nothing to fucking do in Vegas. I've only been here 2 times. This is my second time, obviously. The first time I went was for a bachelor party a couple years ago, and I have to say, growing up in New Jersey, from Atlantic City, coming to Las Vegas, it was way cooler than Atlantic City. So I kind of was enamored. I'm like, wow, this is a gambling city done right. Many years have gone by. I've since moved to Hawaii, for anybody who's following me at all. And I've noticed that it's a lot of smoke and mirrors out here. I mean, beautiful place. I'm staying at the Tropicana, which is like pretty much one of the cheaper spots to stay. I'm moving over to Bally's for Friday, Saturday night, but this is my view. They got me up here on the 17th floor. You can see the MGM Grand in the background. Not to be too pessimistic, it is very exciting for me, just being here and experiencing the whole thing. So thank you guys so much for joining us. What else here? Let's see here. I got to stop saying That's a big thing, I've been told, so I'm going to try to do that. Vegas is back. There's tons of events this week. Justin Bieber, Steve Aoki, David Copperfield. There's so much stuff going on here in Vegas. Getting here on Tuesday, we're just starting to see the effects of that. Obviously, no place has been hit harder from the effects of COVID, especially in terms of economic impact than Las Vegas. It is nice to see a very optimistic group of staff. Every place that you go into, everybody is doing their extra part. Beers are $10 everywhere you go. That seems crazy to me. I mustered up the confidence to ask a bartender about it, and her remark was, it's Vegas, so what do? You argue with that, you just sound like a cheap fuck, I guess. So here we are in Vegas. A couple topics I jotted down today, kind of things that I uncovered, things I wanted to touch on. It's hot. It was 118 degrees out when I filmed that last segment for you guys. I know it probably seemed like I rushed through it, and I probably didn't do more than one take. And the reason for that is, that's exactly right. I rushed through it, and I did it in one take. It was so god darn hot out there. Holy smokes. Being from Hawaii, on the Kona side especially, it's one of the sunnier spots in Hawaii. This was unlike anything I had experienced, but interestingly enough, I was not sweating that badly. It wasn't really that. Mostly the problem that I had was it kept turning the phone off. The sun, I had to get the phone out of the shadow to film this, which I'm actually going to touch on here in a little bit. But every time I did that, I could only get like 9 minutes before the sun itself would tell the phone it's too hot and it would shut down. So it was a tricky little segment that we did, and my girlfriend Uni, my fiance Uni, hit me up, and she helped me out with all the editing and stuff. So although we didn't do all the sound effects and that stuff this week, thank you very much for watching and subscribing and all that. It was great. I'm not saying anymore. I'm not going to do it. Big thing about coming to Las Vegas. My first thing I'm learning as a new journalist out here in Vegas. Don't leave without all of your shit. Oh my gosh. We went this whole thing with my fiance and I. She got this new iPad. She's using my computer. So I was like, I'll take the iPad and I'll edit it. I get to the airport after I get through security in Kona and realize, don't have the iPad. Going to be doing all this week's reporting off the phone. No big deal. I have a background dealing with PA systems, doing stand-up and live music stuff. So go down to Guitar Center, get all the stuff that I need. I pick up a nice brand new mic cable, an XLR cable, 25 footer, so I'll have plenty of room to step back from the phone, get all the way back to the room, and realize I have nothing to cut the zip tie off of this cable with. So I'm staying in this tower that's super far away from the main desk, which is kind of what happens in Vegas, right? If you don't know what you're doing, they just put you up far, far away from everything. And I say, okay, I'll just bring the cable down until I see like a custodian or a room keeper of sorts, and they'll cut it open for me. So I find a janitor out there. He's cleaning the carpets and repairing drywall, doing it all in one shot. And I went up to him and I said, hey, this was after I took an Uber all the way to Guitar Center to get all my gear and came back. Would you mind cutting the zip tie off the cable for me? He says, no problem. I said, he goes to cut it. I said, hey, would you mind if I use the knife? I just don't want to jack this thing up. He says, we're not allowed to give guests the knife. Obviously, for whatever reasons, 9/11, whatever, right? Proceeds to cut straight through the brand new cable that I bought. So now I'm going to miss the Wednesday press conference for most of the fighters on the card, trying to control my rage. Come back to the room, get everything else troubleshot, take another cab to Guitar Center, get the XLR cable, come back, and that's how we reported the last segment. So the moral of the story here is do not forget your gear when you're leaving. Don't just think, it's only an iPhone cable, it's only this, it's only that. If you are a new member of the media looking to report on an event where you're having a hard time finding success, getting interviews, that sort of thing, make sure that you dot all your T's, cross your I's, bring every single cable that you need. Don't get left just hanging out there. That's my advice to you. What else? Food has been a little rough in Vegas, I have to say. I'm not sure if it's because of the labor layoffs or what's going on, but I've been here for 24 hours. I've had diarrhea twice, which is pretty exciting. I ordered the Hawaiian pizza, which interestingly enough had jalapenos on it. I've never been one to shy away from the spice, so I went for it. And oh man, I've been paying the price. Not really relevant to the MMA news topic. Just wanted to fill you guys in. Being the new kid on the block. We got helicopters passing by. Wait till that bugger goes. If anybody out there is thinking about starting an MMA podcast, I will tell you this. It's a tough go. I am learning that reaching out to people on Twitter is virtually useless. LinkedIn, same thing. The only way to really get any credibility, it would seem, through this method that has been established is really to get in on the lower circuits. That's the thing that I'm hearing time and time again is, put your time in. It makes perfect sense. Go to some of these lower promotion events, get to meet some of the fighters, establish relationships with them. And kind of that's the best way I've been told to get into this thing. We are flying by the seat of our pants over here at False Crack MMA. So we didn't get to do that. And because of that, we're getting a lot of second and, third-hand news stories. But I think the important thing is, at least my big takeaway that I'm trying to get from this thing is if you come out here and you're ready to do it, you can't get discouraged. You have to find a way around it. And I think that was a big takeaway for me today. I don't know how long I'm going to last in this game at all, but I do know that there was at least 5 or 6 times today where just these insurmountable issues popped up where it just seemed I wouldn't be able to get past this or that. Maybe I should just put it off to tomorrow, and who knows, right? Time will tell. I think I've had 20 views or something on the first video. It is a tough go in the YouTube world. I spend an hour of the day making content, and then the rest of the 15 hours that I'm alive just retweeting, liking, commenting on these clever comments so people just don't think that you're some bot. And I don't know that there's a better way, but I do believe that there is a space for me here. I think that there aren't enough. There's some really great journalists in MMA. But I don't know, when you look at journalists, how many of them have spent any time training, what it's like to compete in athletics on any kind of level from high school. I mean, you look at some of the guys and you don't know. And had just found myself at home on the couch far too long watching these press conferences, post-fight, whatever, pre-fight, and I'm screaming at the TV like, why don't you ask this? Why don't you ask that? I've had a lot of time off from COVID. It gave me time to rethink things. I'm back in school full-time, and right now we're on summer break. So I just thought to myself, if I'm going to give this thing a shot, if I'm going to give it a go, there's no better time. Well, actually, a better time would have been like a year ago when COVID started, but here we are in Las Vegas trying to get stories. Tons of action this week. This card is crazy. One thing, paying close attention to this press conference today, I was just amazed by it. A lot of times on big pay-per-view events, you do kind of seem to forget the backstories and who's involved in this fight and who's involved in that fight, but this was just such an exciting press event to watch. I mean, there were so many great people. And it was weird that on the UFC's site, or at least the site that I streamed the press conference through, they didn't talk to a lot of people I was hoping that they would talk to. And then I found their interviews later. So they made the press events. I don't know if they had them in a separate room or whatever, but namely like Greg Hardy and that guy I keep mispronouncing his name, but Chris Monteju, who is this young buck who's coming up and fighting Sugar Sean O'Malley. And if you're not paying attention to this fight, I think it's one of the more compelling fights on the card. I'm going to get into a full rundown here later on, but you don't see this often. They're pulling some kid off the bench that's fighting from some lower promotion, and they're putting him in the bright lights. He's not on a prelim. He's not on an early prelim. He is opening up the biggest pay-per-view event of the year. It's super exciting. I always have to check myself a little bit because around all my friends, I'm the biggest MMA fan. So I start chirping up all the stuff. They're like, oh, who gives a shit? But I don't know, something about this kid. I took a look at some of his film today. He's got some really, really exciting finishes. His hair game's on point, let's face it. The green mohawk. I think, unless O'Malley's got an appointment at salons, at Poirier's Salon, he might have this guy beat before he even steps in the cage. That green mohawk is looking dope. He seems unfazed. He seems super humble. All of the makings for a fairy tale win. Could you imagine if this kid pulls it off? I got to say, not who I'm pulling for. I'm a huge fan of Sugar Sean O'Malley. I love the confidence. I love him rolling into the press conference. And I especially like how we all know he's gunning for the rematch with Cheeto. Everybody in the MMA world knows that Sugar Sean O'Malley wants to erase that one. If you ask him, he'll tell you don't even have any losses. But the way he does it is beautiful. It's a book. It's a page straight out of Chael Sonnen's book. He's baiting him into it, telling him, you know what? I have plans to call somebody out for this fight, and it's not going to be Cheeto. Cheeto doesn't deserve a rematch. Cheeto needs to get a few more W's before he needs to come talk to me, and it's great. I love it. Clearly, Sean O'Malley has cast the hook out there. He's jiggling it, and he wants Cheeto Vera to bite. And I'll tell you what. The only thing that will stop this fight from happening is Cheeto Vera's ego. He is now getting close to that top 10. He's not looking downwards. He wants to look up. He's looking for a title shot. But on the right event, it might make sense, especially if there's a fast turnaround here. It might meet up with Cheeto's long layoff that he's going to be facing after his last fight. It makes sense. Man, smooth transitions over here at False Crag Late Night. They call it late night, by the way, because you're not supposed to drink when you're covering MMA events, but this is an editorial. This is a bit like Joe Rogan. So I got my little champagne bucket here. I'm going to crack a Bud Light. My throat's getting a little. In the eternal words of Brock Lesnar, this is for Coors Light, not Bud Light. They're not paying me shit. Just wanted to put that out there. What else? Questions for tomorrow. We don't have a lot of subscribers, but if anybody catches this, I've been told from friends of mine that have been watching the podcast that I should just be more myself, do more comedy. It's a little tricky when you don't have someone to bounce off of. My good friend Mike is going to be joining us for a podcast this week. This whole thing was kind of mine and his brainchild. He's like this big executive over at Uber or something like that. I don't know. But I'm holding his feet to the fire. He's going to be joining us for a podcast this week. You guys will finally get to meet him. But if anybody has any questions for this big press conference tomorrow, I'm going to do my best to weasel my way back there and ask these guys in the flesh. Please comment below. We'll make sure we ask those questions. A couple more things here. I miss my fiance. Oh, it's only been 2 days. It's the first big trip I've taken away from her. Uni, if you're out there watching this, which I know you are because you'll probably be editing it for me, I love you. You're the best. One interesting thing, Greg Hardy. So the press conference that I was watching today didn't include any shots from Greg Hardy that I saw. But I did go back and catch a different one. Some other MMA outlet put out his... It was just kind of a short exchange back and forth that he had with the media. And it seemed like he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's no surprise to me that, Derek Lewis is going to take shots at guys that are kind of nipping at his heels a little bit. But it was interesting. We'll scratch that. What do we got next? Seems like Greg Hardy might have a beef. The event that I was watching, it didn't capture Hardy's interview, so I went back. It was a couple hours later that I actually caught it. And one of the notable things that I found in his interview was that he seems to be a little upset. Greg Hardy's not happy with the way that people have treated him, co-fighters, peers of his in his division. I think that he's used to a certain level of insulation being a former NFL athlete. And then when he parlayed into MMA, I don't know that there was a lot of MMA fans that really were on board or cared to know about Greg Hardy, but he's definitely in the conversation now. I think you have to give him props. I don't really understand the whole thing about calling a guy out because he's calling out like your personal troubles, your misfortunes, your errors of judgment. I mean, I'm not saying that Greg Hardy is not deserving of a second chance. I think everybody should have, for the most part, barring like crazy shit, should have a shot at redemption in their life. But what I don't think you get to do is attack a guy who has been critical of your terrible behavior in the past. Now, I get it. It's not easy to move up in these divisions, right? Nobody wants to take a fight. If you're a huge name, the top 5, nobody wants to take a fight that's when you're ranked 8, 9, 10, whatever. So you have to get creative. You have to get tricky. And I did catch glimpses of that in Greg Hardy's interview with the media. But I got to say, I don't think that he acknowledged any wrongdoing. And that's a deficit that we've seen time and time again with Greg Hardy ever since he entered the promotion, at least from interviews that I've seen. And if you've seen something different, please correct me in the comments. He's always wants to explain away and not really talk about what happened. He just wants to say, oh, things got crazy. You don't know my business. Please, I want to take personal time for me, that sort of thing. But I don't know that you get that. I think when you get brought in bracelets in front of the world to see for, harming another human being, especially when your career is as a professional fighter, you should address it. And I'm sure some people are in Hardy's camp, maybe himself included, obviously himself included, would say that he's addressed it enough. And maybe I haven't done my due diligence, but I would like to see a little bit more acknowledgement, and maybe some, I don't know, I'm not his manager, but like charity work or something just to show that he's turned the cheek. I mean, obviously it's apples and oranges, but like when Michael Vick got in trouble for what he did in the NFL, he went to the ASPCA and the Humane Society, and he tried to just unburn those bridges. And I just think that's something that we haven't seen from Hardy before. Whatever. Talked much too about it already. What else here? Chris Monteu. I think we already talked about him. We'll do one more segment. Where are we at next? Fights not talked about. I don't know if we touched enough on this Ryan Hall, Ila Tapora situation. This Tapora fella, he's 2-0, brand new in the UFC by most metrics. He says he's used to knee bars. I can't help but wonder if he's overlooking Hall, though. He says that he's got no knockout power. He just reduces him to a fighter, of just shitty kicks and nothing else. And I don't know. I kind of think that he might be fronting. I think the big question here is we all know what Ryan Hall's going to do. He wants to get this fight to the ground. He wants to get that heel sweet up in that armpit and do his thing. But obviously, Topuria is well aware of that. Topuria's out there saying things in the media like, oh, the guy's only got one submission against BJ Penn. Well, I don't know if anyone else remembers that fight like I did, but especially being from the Big Island, I was like, why is BJ playing footsie with this motherfucker? Dude, it was pretty badass because he kept kind of slipping back out of it. Eventually he got caught, though. But I don't think it's really fair to say that, Ryan Hall is just a one submission UFC fighter. I mean, obviously, might be a bit of a one submission UFC fighter, but we've all seen what the guy's capable of. Nobody wants to go to the ground with this guy. Not a single person. And I think there's good reason for that. What else we got here? Also, he wants Conor to win. Here's something interesting. I don't know if anybody else is going to cover this, but after listening to both broadcasts of this media day press conference, I thought it was kind of interesting. Luke Thomas is kind of a little bit off the ball. He asked that Carlet Condit question, at least raised his hand, and then he passed it off to somebody else, and he got caught stumbling a couple times. And I know shit happens. I just thought it was kind of interesting. If anybody knows why that might be the reason, hit me up in the comments. Max Griffin versus Carlos Condit. Max Griffin's a big fan. He mentioned that a couple times. He's really stoked about his win streak. Obviously, the guy's had a long layoff, but he's coming off 2 big wins. One thing I found interesting about his comments was that he kind of reiterated some things that you heard Nico Price and some other people say, where he's like, or Sean O'Malley, another guy, oh, I didn't see him fight. I never even looked at his tape. That has got to be gamesmanship. It's got to be. I mean, I could only imagine. I've only done jiu-jitsu and amateur sparring, boxing and stuff, but if I have a UFC fight on the biggest pay-per-view of the year, I'm going to roll that tape, son. I mean, how do you not take a look at the footage? I guess you have other things going on. You're paying for the help, and the coach is supposed to watch it. But I think this might be a tactic. As I'm kind of getting further and further into this MMA journalism thing, I think that when these fighters have the limited opportunity to get the spotlight on them in the form of these press conferences, I don't think they like talking about their opponents. I don't think they want to say their name unless they're trying to parlay it into a fight somewhere up higher in the rankings or something like that. Yeah, it's very weird because, I mean, what else you been doing, Max Griffin? You've been out for forever. I would hope you looked at some tape. Jeez, I mean, what else you doing over there? What else? And the last thing is going to be Michael Piera. Now, this guy had a translator, and it was kind of tough. I kept kind of glazing over. It's been a long night over here doing press, doing news in Vegas on Wednesday night. But Pierre made a couple interesting comments. First of all, John Morgan asked him a great question. He said, do you want to be the best UFC fighter of all time, or do you want to be the greatest fighter of all time? And Pierre didn't waste any time answering the question. I probably should have seen it coming, but I thought it was a great question because you only get so many cracks at this game in the UFC. And even if you're flashy, you might get a couple extra than other people, but you do have to win. And you can't help but to think, if you're a fan of the promotion and you've been watching these events in the past couple of years, I mean, Pierre is burning the fuse. I think he is definitely. There's been performances of his that have left something to be desired by the executives or the matchmakers. And it's time for him to shine. So even though maybe his answer was pretty predictable and that he said he wanted to be a showman, he's not interested in necessarily putting his focus on being the greatest UFC athlete. He wants to be a showman, which I thought was cool. He kind of tilted his hand here. He let the fans in on his tactic. He, as Chael Sonnen would say, he gave you a little look behind the curtain, which is not something that fighters do. And that is going to do it for this week's edition of False Crack MMA After Dark. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. I know I'm like sound like a broken record, but please like, subscribe, comment, notify, all that stuff. It really makes all the difference in the world. Special shout out to all my good friends who have been just putting up with all of the constant updates via text message and emails and other notifications. I very much appreciate that. Tomorrow's a big day. We're going to be covering the main event press conference, Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, the trilogy. So make sure you comment with your questions below. We'll make sure we slip them in. Justin Snow from False Crack MMA. Watch your back. We'll catch you next time. Later.